I'm going to start this episode with a confession that some of you have been waiting to hear me make. I have owned Rolex, more than one over the years, and I sold every one of them. Or I guess some of them were stolen, but I've sold the other ones as well. Now, before any of you grab the pitchforks and get the impression in your head that this is the Rolex is bad episode, it's not. I'm not here to do the tired watch internet thing where someone bashes the most successful watch brand in history to sound interesting at a dinner party. I'm not that guy. The watches were great, all of them. Like, I respect the brand enormously. But the story of why I sold them, the actual honest retrospective story, is the one I've been waiting 11 episodes to tell because I think it explains something that almost every enthusiast in this hobby eventually has to figure out for themselves. And the vehicle for telling that story is a question your friend is going to ask you sooner or later, or like me, you've probably already gotten the question. They're going to say something like, I'm thinking about getting a Rolex. What do you think? Today, we're going to talk about how to be a good friend to that person. And along the way, I'm going to tell you honestly what happened with mine.
Hey, Watchovski. Yeah. What's on your wrist?
All right, welcome back to What's on Your Riste. I'm Watchovski. Last episode was the philosophy one, hedonia, eudaimonia, and the response to it has been incredible. I had no idea that we had listeners outside of the States. I was just assuming there was a couple of handful of folks that were my friends and inner circle folks that were listening, and then all of a sudden I'm getting messages from YouTubers that I really respect in the watch space. So thank you to them. And thanks to the folks it's crazy, in Japan, in Belgium, in the UK that are listening, in Ireland. I am dumbfounded by the fact that people are taking to this. So I just know that I'm humbled, I am honored, and I will do my best to continue to do the homework to make these insightful and enjoyable for you. So now, if you haven't listened to the Hedonia and Eudaimonia episodes, which was episode 10, as much as it's going to hurt me, stop listening here, go back and listen to that episode, and then come back and join us for this one, okay? Because I want us to be all on the same page. There's a ton of foundational information that's going to happen in that episode that will be the layers for this episode. Today, we're going to be applying the framework to, I would say, the most loaded conversation in the entire hobby. So settle in, and we're going to talk about Rolex. And we're going to talk about it honestly. All right. First, segment number one, let's be honest about Rolex. Before I tell you a single word about my own Rolex journey, I want to do something the watch internet almost never does anymore. I want to be honest about Rolex. This is going to sound crazy. You're probably not used to hearing it. Rolex makes spectacular watches. Full stop. Case finishing is industry leading. The bracelets, especially the modern ones with the glide lock and the easy link, are some of the best on the market. And think about it. When was the last time someone told you that the ceramic ball bearings on their flip clasp broke down or wore out? You never hear those stories, right? You hear the ones that, oh, I've had it for 10 years. Do you think I need a service? And they put on a time graph and it's running at +1, +2, right? The in-house movements, they're accurate, they're durable, they're magnetically resistant, they're easily serviced, and they're quietly excellent. And typically, they're thin for 300-meter divers. Their water resistance ratings, if I'm going to go down that rabbit hole, their ratings are real. They test their watches, and honestly, they are conservative in their testing, meaning that a Submariner, if it's rated to 300 meters in practice, it's going to handle way deeper than that. The oyster steel that they use is outstanding. It takes a great polish, it's comfortable on the skin, it's finished well, and the build quality across their entire lineup, not just, their dive watches, is consistently world class, and it's in a way that almost no manufacturer can do this at this scale. And if you talk to other manufacturers, they will tell you that we cannot do what Rolex does. And the brand recognition, that's not a bug, that's a feature of Rolex. So if you wear your Rolex to your in-laws' house, to your father-in-law's house, they know what it is. They'll smile and they get it. And there's this entire intergenerational cultural fluency around Rolex that no other watch brand on earth has built. There's no way that's going to be rebuilt by another brand. So that fluency is real. It's not vapor, it's not marketing fluff. It is the result of more than 100 years of consistent design language, consistent quality, consistent positioning, and you can't fake that. And honestly, people can't match it. And so when someone says that they want a Rolex, and I want every listener to hear this, they're not wrong. They're responding to something real. The watches are great. The recognition is great. The brand has earned its place at the center of horology, even if some of us in the hobby have, for our own reasons, moved on from them. And that's my honest baseline. So now let me tell you the rest of the story. Segment two, I'm going to call my Rolexes and why I sold them. So here is briefly my Rolex history, and I won't tell you which ones were sold and which ones were stolen, but just know that even the ones that were stolen were on chopping blocks in my own head. Someone just kind of accelerated that process. See, when I'm healing, I can have some fun with this kind of stuff, right? And the watches I think I'm going to talk about that I'm going to mention, I no longer own them. Obviously, they're sold, obviously, or taken. And each of them was kind of this objective measure, I think, of an excellent purchase. And each of them eventually left. So it's like, well, these were awesome watches. They were excellent purchases. I thought I got good examples of all of them. And then I sold them or got rid of them, right? So the first example I want to talk about is the 14060M. So you're going to see the 14060M. It's a no date sub. It's a four liner. It's classic. It's that watch that, 100 forum threads and 1,000 YouTube videos talk about. It's the Submariner because it has the proportions of the older models. It has this aluminum bezel and it's simple. It has a utilitarian sub dial. It's the Submariner that serious watch people are supposed to want. And it is, without exaggeration, one of the best dive watches ever made. I loved it. Genuinely, I loved that watch. And then I sold it. And the second was a 16600 Sea-Dweller. It was produced from 1989 to about 2008, and it went on this epic 20-year run. And then quietly, it became one of Rolex's most respected professional divers. And this is crazy. It was 40 millimeters, and it didn't have a Cyclops, but it did have a date. So when you look at it kind of from afar, it just looks like a typical Submariner, right? Sat a little bit taller, had a little bit more wrist presence, but again, no Cyclops, and it had more of a matte dial. Had a flat top crystal, had a far deeper water resistance rating than the Submariner. And so the Sea-Dweller for that entire generation of collectors who came up with that, they loved that watch. And then it got modernized by the 116600. It's kind of the more modern Sea-Dweller version. Again, still 40 millimeters, and that line was in 2014. And that Sea-Dweller, again, is, for me, one of the ones that's kind of on my trajectory of watches that just kind of, they just haunt me. There's something about that watch that it just seems outstanding, okay? And so again, we talk about this clean version that I had of this 16600. It became sought after, and again, even though the newer 116600, the more updated version, before they went to the kind of bigger cases of 43 millimeters and 44 millimeters and so on, they had it in a 40 millimeter, but they had updated the bezel, and so you got a ceramic bezel, and you had this updated bracelet, which was great. Now, for most folks, they do like again, people like me like the aluminum bezels. We like the fading and the patina and all that kind of stuff. But if I'm underwater, I need a legible bezel, and so again, I lean towards the ceramic in that case. Again, we like what we like, right? And so to go back to the 16600 that I had, it's become more sought after. The case profile I think is more pure, and it has this more vintage correct kind of this modern feel that you might have in some of the newer ones. I like the vintage feel. I had added a steel reef comfort link extension to mine, and think of that as kind of this similar to what the Oyster Perpetuals have, just a little flip out, couple of millimeters just to give you a little break when you're outside with the kids on the swings and it's, 100 outside. Again, so it's just a little aftermarket on the fly micro adjustment system. I really recommend those. Those are great. They're a little bit pricey, but Steel Reef stuff is solidly built, and it fits. It usually fits really well with the models that they say that they're going to fit. So again, that 16600, I loved it genuinely. Like I loved it, and I sold it. And so the pattern didn't stop with Rolex. This is weird too. So I went down this other rabbit hole with a pair of vintage, I would say, well, we'll say neo vintage because I think that hurt some people's feelings when I was talking about the 90s, but vintage Omegas, and I love those as well. And then guess what? They also got sold. And I think the more I think about it, the more I realize that they belong in this same conversation. Even though this is a Rolex chat, the Omegas I'm going to talk about just for a second. So the Omega Seamaster Professional reference 2254.50. They call them the 2254s. They're the enthusiasts. The community loves to call this the Peter Blake. The 41 millimeter is a black wave dial. It had sword hands. Those sword hands, I love those sword hands. In fact, I actually created a song about bringing back the 2254, which I'll swing in sometime. The caliber 1120 was inside of there. It was basically an ETA 2892 A2 base. It was reworked by Omega. It sat thin. The watch was thin. It was comfortable. And it was named in tribute to Peter Blake, actually Sir Peter Blake. He was a New Zealand yachtsman and an environmentalist who was tragically killed in the Amazon in 2001. And it's a watch with one of the most respected backstories in modern Omega history. And so, again, I love that watch and I sold it. And then I owned a reference 2264, 65. I had what we call in my little texting circle the purple Blake. It's basically the electric blue version of the 2254. I had bezels that I could swap out with it. I had a ghosted bezel that was just wonderful. And so it's kind of the sibling of the 2254. Again, a little bit different. And I love that watch. It was unique. It was cool, I thought. It had an awesome, just wild blue dial and then this awesome bezel, and I could swap it out with other bezels. So I love that watch. And then I sold it too. Something's wrong with me, right? So now when I list these four watches in a row, the 14060M, the Sub, the 16600 Sea-Dweller, the Peter Blake, and then Peter Blake's, purple brother, right? When you look at these on paper, it's kind of like a brilliant little mini dive collection. Like vintage, neo vintage, Swiss icons, reliable, easily serviced, well respected, under the radar, with the right people would know them, but if not, they just look like regular watches. So none of them are bad picks. None of them are even questionable picks by like literally every objective metric the watch internet would use to grade a collection. These four watches are correct. And I got rid of them. And it took me years to figure out why. Segment 3, I'm going to call the revelation. Now, every one of those watches was prescribed to me, not by a doctor, not by a salesman, by the watch community. Now, listen, when you start in this hobby, you do what any reasonable person does. You go look for the people who know more than you read the forums, you watch the YouTubers, you ask a friend who's been collecting for a long time. Maybe you listen to some YouTuber with a weird name, right? Or a podcaster with an even crazier name. And all of those people, very kind, share with you the watches that have, over their years of wearing, become their meaningful pieces, their bedrock references, the watches that for them deserve to be the center of a serious collection. And so here's the trap: it's their meaningful pieces, not yours. Each of the four watches that I mentioned came into my collection because someone else told me that they were the right pieces for me. The vintage 14060M because the smart sub, because it has an aluminum bezel, because it has a 2 or a 4-line dial depending on the one you wanted. It was the connoisseur's choice. The 16600 because that's the purest Sea-Dweller, the last of the classic case before Rolex modernized the line, right? 20-year production behind it. The watch the older guys in the hobby will tell you that is the Sea-Dweller, bro. And then you get the Peter Blake Seamasters because They're thinking, this is the collector's alternative to the Bond sub, right? Slim case, sword hands, a tool watch heart with a quietly meaningful backstory. Each of those frames was true for each of those watches by, again, every external metric. It's the right pick. And I wore each of them for a while and I waited for the meaning to arrive. And the meaning never arrived. It never did. And it's not because those watches were bad. Those watches are great. They are fantastic. And if you're looking down at your watch right now and it's one of those watches, again, part of me is still a little bit jealous because they are fantastic watches. But again, the watches weren't bad. They were great. But the meaning was somebody else's. Someone else had built up the meaning of those watches to me. And that meaning lived in their lives, not in mine. And when I wore the 14060M, the sub, I was wearing another person's eudaimonia, if that makes any sense. And the reference is great. The story behind why some collectors deeply love that exact reference is fantastic. But the why, or the story behind why I should love it, that part was secondhand. It was borrowed. And borrowed meaning in this hobby does not stick. And if you turn watches that you are absolutely enamored with and you roll over them pretty quickly and cycle through them, it might be because you're chasing something like I was. So, that, by the way, is, I think, the trap that I had named in episode 10. This is the third trap, right? It's mistaking someone else's eudaimonia for your own. And now it looks like a serious collection. It checks every box. It would pass any watch nerd's test that you could throw at it. And the entire time, the wearer, right, Riste, quietly, sometimes unconsciously, wondering why this watch doesn't feel like it's theirs. And that's what happened with mine. And so I sold them, or I had plans on selling them, right? They were on the chopping block, as we call it. Not because they're bad watches, because I was finally honest enough eventually to admit that they were on my wrist because other people had told me that that's where they should be. And I think life's way too short to be wearing other people's watches. Now, segment 4, the two Rolex grails I respect from a distance. Now, this part I'm going to throw in there just as kind of a curveball. And I want to be very clear about something. The fact that I sold those Rolexes doesn't mean that the brand stopped speaking to me. It absolutely did not. There are, in particular, two references that I have immense respect for. Watches that I've looked at from a distance for years, watches that in certain corners of the collector's world are spoken with like genuine reverence. And I want to give them their kind of shout out as well. And I kind of teased one of them, but I'm going to throw in a curveball as well. So the first one's going to be the 16710. The GMT-Master II. It has a Pepsi bezel. It's aluminum. It's pre-ceramic. It's pre-Jubilee only bracelets, right? It's the only one, or it's the one with the matte aluminum insert, the one that fades, that ghosts, that develops this character with age that ceramic simply cannot. And so for me, the 16710 is, in kind of the right circles, one of the most beloved Rolex references ever made. The travel watch with real credentials. The proportions are perfect. The patina on a well-aged 16710 that kind of gets washed out a little bit or slightly oxidized, this kind of red and blue. I think it's one of the most beautiful aging effects of any Rolex of all time. And I've admired the 16710 for years, so I get why people love it. And guess what? I genuinely get it. And the second was that 116600, the Sea-Dweller. And I talked about it a little bit before, but the idea of having a more modernized Sea-Dweller with even, more capability, the on-the-fly adjustments, the ceramic bezel, but still also not having a cyclops, I think was just, it's a quirky watch. It's just remarkable. And then the small one that I didn't mention and I haven't mentioned, but that I have had in the past that didn't make it was the 116034. It was an OP, as an Oyster Perpetual, 36 millimeter. It was a blue dialed Oyster Perpetual, but it had a dial layout similar to an Explorer. So it had a 369 dial, but it was blue. And honestly, that watch was spectacular in pictures. The Explorer, I think for many collectors, this kind of stripped down, pure, or very much an Everest looking watch from like the 50s. Time only, no date, no kind of bezel theatrics. And it was just kind of a perfect watch. And it was different enough for me from the Explorer. And I love the 36 millimeter Explorer in black. I think that's a spectacular watch. I love the idea of having a blue dialed Rolex. I thought that was an awesome thing. And so when I got to see this watch and I got to put it on my wrist, the only thing that I could find that was wrong with it was that it just felt too small for me. And my wrist will go from 7.25 to 7.5 inches. And so that was for me kind of a tough time to be able to go, I really like this watch, but it just wears too small. It's like I'm overpowering the watch. And so, and then there's other ones down the rabbit hole, a 39 millimeter pure white Oyster Perpetual with no date, no craziness. Those watches I think are stunning. So when they had the 39 millimeters, those were outstanding as well. And there's a lot of references that we could go down a whole rabbit hole of that. So, and again, neither of those examples and none of those examples are really in my collection now. So what I'll tell you something is something interesting, and I want you to kind of take this seriously. The 16710, the 116034, the 36 millimeter Oyster Perpetual, the 116600 Sea-Dweller. They're watches that I have not owned or haven't sold or haven't cycled through, and they haven't entered my collection or been quietly disposed of, which means that I find this fascinating as I look back at my patterns because these are watches that I admire for having survived these tests of years. And I think that's part of the tell for us is if we want to watch and if we want it for a decade, is that a watch that you're going to get? If you've wanted a watch for a decade, is that something that will come into your collection and then you'll keep, or will it go away? And I think sometimes when I've wanted a watch for 5, 10 years and I get them, sometimes they meet or exceed expectations, and other times it's like you've don't meet your idols, right? And so I think that's fascinating as well. And so again, these Rolexes have, that I bought, I think they were, if I'm being honest, they were Rolexes that I bought because someone told me to, and then I sold them. And the Rolexes that I admire from the outside, from a buying decision, I still admire them, but I haven't pulled the trigger. And there's this relationship I have with those references. It's complicated and it's uncomplicated by ownership and lack of ownership. And maybe that says something about the differences between wanting a watch and wanting to own a watch. And I don't think that those are the same thing. So this hobby will eventually teach you that distinction. And sometimes it can be very expensive lessons that we're going to learn. And sometimes it just takes a few sales, I think, to kind of get there. So let's get into why I think I've laid all of this foundation to get to the question of this entire episode. Segment 5. So your friend wants a Rolex. All right. Okay, so now let's get into this scenario. Your friend pulls you aside. They've been thinking about it. They want to buy a Rolex. I want to set up a particular kind of friend here because the advice, I think, changes depending on who they are. And apologies in advance, too. If you hear my voice starting to get raspy, this is the third time I've recorded this episode. I've had tons of issues with rendering and then errors and then things getting deleted. So if you hear me falling apart, my voice, I'm doing my best here. So let's talk about that. So when we talk about the advice kind of changing depending on who your friend is, the friend I want you to picture is someone who has thought about this. They have not walked up to you saying, "That's a nice watch." And then, "Hey, I would like a nice watch." There's something different. They're specifically walking up to you and they're saying something along the lines of, "Hey, I want a Rolex." And maybe they've wanted one since their dad wore one. Maybe they hit a milestone like a promotion or a birthday. Maybe they had a son or a daughter born. Maybe they're a grandparent now. Maybe they sold a business, whatever it is, right? Maybe they've been quietly admiring this brand for 15 years now and they are ready. So the point is, they know what they want. The Rolex is not a placeholder for a fancy watch in their mind. It's specifically the watch that they want. And so here's the most important advice I'm going to give to you on this entire podcast. Help them get it. That's it. The whole segment, help them get the watch that they want. Help them find a good AD. Help them avoid gray market markups if they can, if they're not in a hurry, or put them in contact with someone that you trust in that space. Help them with sizing when the time comes. Help them figure out how to adjust their bracelet when the time comes if they need that. Help them think about and think through the references within the entire Rolex catalog that actually matches with their life. Don't get them something that they may not need or encourage them to get something that's outside the scope of what they're excited about. Help them prepare for an AD conversation. Help them get on the right list with the right boutique for the right piece. Now, I'm begging you here. Do not, again, I'm begging you, do not be the friend who, the moment they say, I want a Rolex, starts pitching them on another brand. Don't do that. Don't be the friend who lectures them about independent watchmaking. And again, you're hearing this from a dude who loves independent watchmaking. Okay. So I see the contradictions here. Don't be that guy. Don't be that girl. Don't be the friend who tries to redirect them into Grand Seiko because the finishing is better dollar for dollar. Or don't be the friend that whispers, hey, have you heard of Czapek? Or check out this dude's podcast when he's talking about Dornbluth, right? Don't put that in their ear as they're trying to figure out what size, you know, sub they're going to get and which model they're looking at. And again, I love those alternative brands. I love the independent brands. We've done full episodes on a couple of them already. They are spectacular, but they're not what your friend is asking for. When your friend says, I want a Rolex, and they mean it, they're not asking you for a referral to a different brand. They're asking you to help them get one. Anything else is you projecting your own taste onto somebody else's journey. And that's their journey to take. It's not yours. I'm going to tell you exactly what I think the trap is here because I've seen a good watch friend turn into this kind of bad watch friend. You can still be a good person and a good friend, but good watch friends are harder to find. The trap is thinking that because you've moved on past Rolex in your own collecting journey, you're doing your friend a favor or a solid by saving them from it. You're not saving them. I'll make the argument here, and it's going to be contradictory to a lot of people's thought process of who I am. I'm going to make the argument that you are robbing them of something. You're robbing them of their own first Rolex experience. The walk into the boutique, the phone call from the AD, the unboxing, the afternoon that they're going to spend with that watch on their wrist, staring at it, taking pictures, and not believing that it's actually theirs. Those moments belong to them. They're some of the most magical moments in this hobby, and they have very few moments that we get in this space that are kind of like that. And I kind of laugh because I know you kind of get to feel what this is going to feel like for them. And so, again, the people that go up on, Reddit or wherever, and they go and post their wrist shots and they're excited and it's the first time that they've done this stuff. And then the entire watch community, there's like a split. It's like half of them are so excited for them and the other half are just crapping on their decisions, right? And it's just a reminder of the space and what people are doing in this space. And so just remember that watch is yours for you. Their watch is going to be theirs. So those magical moments in this hobby, those few and rare ones that we get, don't take them away from people. Again, those moments are theirs. And so just because we or you have decided in retrospect that Rolex wasn't your endpoint doesn't mean that it's not going to be theirs. And you might be in this podcast listening going, I love Rolex and I respect the fact that Riste respects them as well. And even though he doesn't own any right now, maybe he will in the future, right? And so I understand that you and I are maybe in different places, and that's cool. Like, and the fact that you might have a Rolex on your wrist, maybe you have a 36 millimeter Explorer, and you're like, this watch makes me so freaking happy. I want to celebrate that with you. There's no, there's no animosity there. There's nothing. Those are spectacular watches, and if I could pull off a 36 millimeter Explorer, dollars to donuts, I'm gonna be rocking a 36 millimeter. Just for me, they just wear a touch too small. And so now, if Rolex is going to be your friend's first proper mechanical watch, or even their only proper mechanical watch, it is, I think, in my opinion, the exact right answer. The recognition, the durability, the resale stability, the cultural fluency, all of those check boxes that you're going to get when you listen to the YouTubers, right? The story of owning one, all of it. Rolex is for that very specific person at that specific moment in time. it's the right answer. So again, help them get it. Now, segment 6, I'm going to give you a brief second scenario, just because again, my career is it's foundational in asking questions and taking positions that I don't necessarily agree with sometimes to get people to think more critically. And so let's talk about this. So the brief second scenario. Now, quickly, because I want this episode to kind of stay focused, I'm going to detour just a little bit. I'm going to, just go outside the lane a little bit, and I'm going to come right back in. I think there's a second type of friend out there. The friend who, might say, I want a Rolex, but is, when you actually dig in a little bit in the conversation, they're using Rolex kind of as a generic synonym for a nice watch. And so they don't have a specific reference in mind. They haven't done the research. They're just thinking Rolex because in a large world, Rolex has come to mean good watch. And so what you're translating that and what they're trying to say is, I want a good watch. And for that friend, a slightly different conversation, I would say, is warranted. Not a redirect, just a conversation. What do they like? What would they actually wear? What life do they live? Now, remember, as people move through their lives and their watches change. We have different seasons, we have different chapters that we go through, right? And so then what you can do is present them, their Rolex options, along with possibly one or two thoughtful alternatives that match what you've learned about them. And then let them decide with that information, not with a default. Give them the choices and then step back and let them process what the decision is going to be. But but listen to them. If they're saying, I love to be in the water, right? I love going swimming with my kids, and I just want to be able to have a watch that I could put on that's accurate and reliable, that has a good water resistance rating. You can ask questions about that, but then don't recommend a watch that has, a 5 bar or a 50-meter water resistance, right? Make sure you're looking at 100 meters or more. Give them something with a screw down crown. Give them suggestions there, right? So be that good friend. And again, even with that friend, and I want to be very clear about this, if at the end of the conversation they still want a Rolex, put your big boy pants on, put your big girl pants on, and help them get it. Your job as that close watch friend is to not talk them out of it. Your job is to make sure that they know why they're choosing and what they're choosing among all of these other options. And so that's the difference, I think, between informing and redirecting. And our goal here is to inform. They redirect themselves wherever they're going to go. And so back to the main thread, let's talk about segment 7, and we're going to sit into these 2 failure modes. And I think I added this section because, again, I failed so many times this last couple of weeks, as I thought I kind of was figuring stuff out, and then I'm a failure. I've tried so hard to get things right, and I just continue to mess up. So, and then doing all the homework on these episodes too, the amount of work is nuts. So I'm getting all of that and then having it to deliver and then having it just disappear. Just, it's a punch in the gut. So when we talk about failure modes, know that part of this is just me projecting my failure modes. Okay. Now, there are 2 ways watch friends I think will mess this up. And again, I've messed up this on both sides, and I've had to apologize to people on both sides. So I see both of them all the time in this community, and I want to name them so that you can avoid them. So failure mode 1, and again, Riste is guilty of this, is the snob. It's the watch friend who hears someone say, I want a Rolex, and then immediately starts performing their own sophistication, right? Hold on a second. Have you considered something more interesting? A Submariner is kind of boring, isn't it? Let me show you what a real connoisseur wears. All this garbage, right? The person thinks that they're educating their friend. They're not, right? I thought I was educating my friends. I was not. I was projecting. I was using my friend's vulnerable moment as a moment of asking, where they're asking me to help, to demonstrate to the friends and to themselves that, I've moved past this obvious choice. And so let me help you sidestep this obvious choice. And guess what? That is a terrible way to be a friend in this hobby. You don't do that to people. So don't be that person. If you find yourself becoming a person that's doing that, stop, take a breath, do what I did and just go, man, that's a sucky way to be a good friend to people in this community. So take a breath. The Rolex is what your friend asked for, so help them get that Rolex. Now, failure mode 2, I'm going to call this the mute cheerleader. This is the opposite end of the spectrum, right? The opposite mistake. Your friend says something like, hey, I want a Rolex. And you say, great pick. And then it's like crickets afterwards, nothing else. So the person thinks that you're being supportive, kind of, but you're actually just being kind of useless. It's in my world in education, for example, it'd be the same example of students writing a 3 or a 5-page paper, or somebody writing something longer, a big document, and then me putting good job or a smiley face or a thumbs up at the end. It's like that's a ridiculous response. This person poured time into this. They read the materials, they listened to my lectures, they went through the whole thing, and then they created this document. It could be upwards of 750 words or more, in-text citations, proper citations at the end, proper formatting, and all this kind of stuff. And I give them a thumbs up. That's not being supportive. That's me being useless. That's me not earning my keep in my role in that transaction, in that interaction with that student. They're doing their job. Let me do my job. And so again, failure mode 2 is being the mute cheerleader. Again, don't be useless here. Your friend's asking for help. They value your expertise, and a one-liner cheer response doesn't give them what they asked for. So put the phone down, look them in the eye, and have a conversation with them, because they want you to share what you know. They want you to walk them through references. They want you to talk about the AD experience or the conversation, about sizing, about the real trade offs of a Submariner versus a Datejust versus a GMT for their specific life. So the mute cheerleader is going to withhold experience, and they're going to call it kindness. It's not being kind, it's just being a bad friend. So be a good friend. And so the right move, I think, is kind of in the middle path of this. You're going to inform without redirecting. You're going to support without being silent. And hopefully you can tell them everything that you would have told yourself if you were buying it. Don't try to talk them out of a decision, but instead help them make a decision that they're already making, just with more information. Now, segment 8, we're going to say when Rolex might not be the final answer. You knew this was coming, right? From an indie guy. So here's the part that I'm going to be careful with in this episode, because this is the part that I kind of have to thread a needle. So if I don't thread that needle, give me a heads up in the comments. If your friend is buying a nice watch, like the nice watch, it's like their one nice watch, which again, I envy those folks. The watch that they wanted because their dad had one, the watch that they've been saving up for. Some folks, maybe they saved up for years to get this watch, right? The watch is going to mark something. The Rolex is, I think, often it's the exact right choice, so you help them get it. But there's a second case, the case where your friend is not just buying one watch. It's the case, and this is the part where you're probably sending this to them, it's the case where they're at the beginning of becoming an enthusiast. Yeah, they got the Rolex, they love it, and then guess what? 6 months later, they're texting you or they're calling you and they're saying, hey, what about this watch? They might now be asking you about Tudor or Omega. They've started to use words like movement architecture and finishing and in-house, and they're asking you about Grand Seiko, and that's kind of something that's different, right? Now they're sending you YouTube videos, and they're asking you about this micro brand, and they know about a Zelos drop, right? That friend is now becoming you. And if I'm being honest, and I'm trying to be as honest as I can in this podcast, the whole point of this show, I think this is where so many of us in the hobby eventually arrive. The Rolex stays, cool. Or the Rolex doesn't stay, also cool. But the center of the conversation in your collecting life starts to move. It moves towards brands that possibly we've talked about in the last 10 episodes. Independents, microbrands, watchmaker-driven companies, watches that almost nobody recognizes when you wear them. So why does that happen? I'll give you my honest answer. And I'm specifically saying this as my answer from my journey again. Take that for what it's worth. Your friend's journey may be completely different than yours, and that is genuinely fine. For me, the more I live with watches in this hobby, and again, going very back to the beginning of when I started owning watches, we're going 4 decades now. The more I realize that the watches that meant the most to me were the watches I only kind of knew about, the watches whose value lived inside me, if that makes any sense. The watches I didn't need anybody to recognize. Now, the Rolex on my wrist, the Rolex is brilliant to it gets recognized by everybody, and so it has that kind of superpower. And that can obviously be a detriment as well, depending on where you're at in the world. But the flip side of that superpower is that the meaning of that watch, it's it's become partially set by other people, by your in-laws, by your colleague, by the stranger at the airport. It's what it translates to me is that watch never becomes yours. It's always theirs, right? And we always talk about this in my circles, as well as when I see someone with a Submariner, for example. I don't know if they're a watch person or not, or maybe they just have a sub and that's their only watch, or if that's their travel watch or whatever. They may not even know that, Rolex is the brand and Submariner is the references. They don't know any of that, the model numbers and that kind of stuff. And that's fine. But if I see someone wearing a Czapek, for example, or if I see somebody wearing a Dornbluth, or I see somebody even wearing a Tudor or an Omega, I can have different conversations typically with those kinds of folks than I might with a Rolex person. And I say that as a, Rolex former owner, right? And again, that's not a criticism of Rolex. It's just there's a different relationship, I think, to watchmaking. And both of those relationships, again, I think they're completely legitimate. Nobody, again, we talk about my wife, for example, and the way that she enjoys watches. She doesn't know the reference numbers. She doesn't care. She just enjoys the watches. And so let people enjoy their watches. And so I think both of those, again, completely legitimate. Some collectors, I think, want watches that everyone recognizes, right? They want a watch when they go somewhere. They want everybody to know that they have that watch. That's fine. And then some collectors want watches that almost no one knows. And so I think most of us, I think in the end of this hobby, I think we want a little bit of both. We want watches, I think, at least I do, that are recognizable and well known, but then I want those kind of curveballs as well. That it's like when people ask you, like, whoa, 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 what is that? So again, if your friend asks you 6 months after buying a Rolex and they call you and they start asking different kinds of questions, that's a sign that maybe, I wouldn't say that that's not a sign that you should have steered them somewhere else. It's a sign that your friend is kind of growing in this space. And now, with that growth, the rest of the hobby is going to become open to them, including and especially these brands that almost no one has heard of. And I think that's the purpose of this podcast. Is I think that you, part of this kind of tribe, have become one of those people that you own your Rolex and you enjoy it, but you're looking somewhere else, right? Or you don't own your Rolex and you're looking somewhere else. Whatever it is, just know that you're welcome here. Now, segment 9, let's talk about what's next. Deep breath as I've recorded this multiple times. So this is going to bring me, I think, beautifully to what's going to come up in the next episode. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a teaser of what's coming up in the next one. So I think if Rolex is the brand whose value lives in the significant part, the recognition, so what's the opposite of that? And you can kind of see how my brain works as I sort of weave these things together. I see them very much these episodes as kind of chapters and standalone documents, and so I want them to kind of flow together. So I mean, if you could see my planning of my post-it notes and all this kind of stuff of how I think this is all going to work out. Now, I hope that that's coming across to you as well as this builds out. You can see how my brain kind of works. So if Rolex is the significant part, it has the recognition. I'm asking the question, what is the opposite of that? Now, again, not the rejection of Rolex, not the snob anti-Rolex pose, the actual opposite, as in they could sit next to each other in the watch box. The opposite, think about that. The brands whose possibly their value lives somewhere completely different. Brands whose value lives in kind of the bloodline, in the workshop that they came from, in the people who trained them, or actually knowing who the watchmaker was that actually made the watch on your wrist. So here's something that most listeners don't know. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, there was a small workshop in the Swiss town of Le Loc, and there was this single kind of complications house called Renaud Papi, and it's pronounced or it's spelled Renaud and Papi. And ultimately, it was basically owned by Audemars Piguet. And inside this workshop, at these adjacent benches, there was this small group of people that were working on grand complications for the highest end brands. And there was a small group of young watchmakers, and you've probably never heard of them yet. Maybe you have. But then, within 20 years or so, that small group of benchmates, they'd go get coffee and drinks together. They'd go get lunch and dinner together. And they became, they got to know one another. But 20 years later, they would scatter across Europe. And each of them would start these independent brands that we know today, or that I know and that I'm trying to share with you. And some of them make the most respected watches in the world. And they started at that bench. Robert Greubel and Stefan Forsey met at Renaud and Papi. And they would go on to start Greubel Forsey, the most technically ambitious tourbillon house, I would argue, in the world. Two brothers from a small town in the Netherlands, Bart and Tim Grönefeld, they trained at Renaud and Papi. They would return home and they would start this tiny family workshop making watches that were inspired by their grandfather's clock tower mechanism. And through this connection, there was this tie that tied them together. There's a French watchmaking house in Morteau called Pequignet, and they're in the process right now of trying to revive 100-year or 100% French hot horology. And the rumor is that they had reportedly hired some movement architecture engineers, designers from Greubel Forsey's workshop to produce an in-house movement. And that movement's in the Concorde, and you can see it when you see that watch because it is slammed thin, and it very much looks like kind of like a Laurent Ferrier kind of a feel, but it's at a fraction of the price. And so again, 3 brands, 1 workshop, and 3 completely different paths. So in the next episode, we're going to be taking a look at this kind of Renaud and Papi, kind of this feel of what's going on there. And I think the story of how a single building in the law quietly produced the future of independent watchmaking, and how today you can actually wear one of those bloodlines on your wrist. They are completely different price points. Trust me, I will get into the prices of some of them, but I'll tell you that Pequignet is very much in striking distance for most people who are obviously listening to this podcast. And it's one of my favorite stories in this whole hobby, and I can't wait to share it with you. So that is episode 11. Can't believe we made it to 11 of What's on Your Riste. If this episode hit, if you've been the snob or you are the snob or the mute cheerleader, or maybe you were the friend that got steered toward the wrong watch, or any of the above, send me a message. I want to hear your stories. Again, we're trying something out that's different and think in this space. And so again, as we grow, as this community grows, I'm excited to take your input and suggestions and put them in there. If you want to shoot me an email directly, it's going to be Riste, Riste, podcast @gmail.com. That's what we're using for now. If it doesn't work, then I will try to get it updated. But restaypodcast @gmail.com is how you can communicate with me directly. And I want to hear your stories. I want to hear the good ones. I can hopefully share them in future episodes once I figure out what this is all going to look like, again, with your permission. And then maybe you'll end up on a future episode. And so, again, if you've got a friend who's right now sitting on a Submariner waitlist or walked into a boutique last week and they put their name down, maybe send them this episode. Tell them their watch friend approves. Tell them to enjoy the wait. Tell them that the day when that watch arrives is going to be one of the greatest days in this hobby and to enjoy it. Now, to Rolex, genuine respect from all of us, always. I'm Watchovski. Take care of yourselves and wear something good, whatever good means to you.